The modern metropolis of Philadelphia conceals a time capsule of human governance. Nestled within the strict geometry of the urban grid stands a Georgian-style edifice that appears at first glance more akin to an English country estate than the epicenter of a global political earthquake. Yet, this structure, Independence Hall, is arguably the most consequential civic building in the modern world. It is not celebrated primarily for its architectural grandeur, though its symmetry and balance are striking, but rather for the profound, universal principles of freedom and democracy articulated within its walls. Here, the United States of America was forged in the fires of armed rebellion and subsequently tempered by the grueling compromises of a fledgling republic. But the legacy of this building is not merely a triumphant, unilateral narrative of liberty. It is a highly complex tapestry woven with threads of revolutionary brilliance, agonizing political concessions, and the dark, enduring paradox of human enslavement. This documentary explores the exhaustive history of Independence Hall, a stage where imperfect men wrestled with perfect ideals, leaving behind a blueprint for self-governance that continues to shape political thought across the globe. The history of this venerated structure dates to 1729, a period when the Pennsylvania Assembly authorized the construction of a permanent meeting house for the provincial government, which had operated without an official, centralized building for a half-century, often meeting in private homes and taverns. The monumental project was spearheaded by Andrew Hamilton, a prominent attorney and Speaker of the Assembly, who assumed the role of architectural visionary. Hamilton's design was deeply influenced by English architectural pattern books, deliberately employing the rigid, symmetrical Georgian-style dot. In the early 18th century, this specific choice of architecture was not merely aesthetic. It served as a calculated statement of British elite culture. It was designed to project a sense of order, proportion, and institutional permanence during a demographic period when the Pennsylvania colony was experiencing a massive influx of German and Scots-Irish immigrants. To execute this grand vision, Hamilton partnered with Edmund Woolley, a master builder and a highly respected early member of the Carpenters Company. Woolley's expertise spanned the vital disciplines of architecture, engineering, and carpentry, an essential combination for managing a project of this unprecedented colonial magnitude. Construction commenced in 1732, but the process was agonizingly protracted. The Pennsylvania colonial legislature funded the project piecemeal, releasing capital only as funds became available in the provincial treasury. The Assembly first occupied the unfinished shell of the building in 1735, seeking to establish its legislative center of government. However, financial constraints brought the project to a halt, and Hamilton died in 1741 with his vision incomplete. It was not until 1742 that the Assembly Room received its final interior finish, and the main block of the building was finally deemed complete in 1748. Originally, the Pennsylvania State House lacked its most iconic and defining feature. As designed, the building had no tower or steeple. It was not until 1749 that the Assembly again called upon Woolley to add a tower and an octagonal wooden steeple to the south side. Finished around 1750 to 1753, this critical addition provided a distinct church-like silhouette and created a housing for a massive bell. The Assembly intended for the steeple to hold a 2,080-pound bell, an artifact that would ultimately crack, be recast, and pass into global legend as the Liberty Bell, later serving as an iconic symbol for abolitionists. The completed building, considered the most ambitious public building in the 13 colonies, now housed the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the Pennsylvania provincial government under a single roof. Before the State House became the crucible of American independence, it functioned as the supreme venue for provincial law and order. The courtroom on the first floor served as the Pennsylvania Supreme Court chamber from 1743 to 1799. The architecture of this space vividly exemplifies the stark realities of pre-Bill of Rights justice. The physical layout, designed to intimidate and establish strict hierarchies, includes the original tipstaff, a wooden pole featuring a brass tip utilized by court officers to subdue unruly onlookers and maintain strict decorum. This specific courtroom was the theater for some of the earliest legal and philosophical battles in American history. It was one of the first courtrooms in the colonies to entertain the radical legal argument that disagreement with a political leader does not inherently constitute sedition, a foundational concept that would later become a cornerstone of modern Anglo-American law and First Amendment protections. By the spring of 1775, the increasingly strained relationship between the American colonies and Great Britain had violently ruptured. Following the bloodshed at Lexington and Concord, the Pennsylvania State House transformed overnight from a provincial administrative center into the nerve center of a continental rebellion. Beginning on May 10, 1775, the Pennsylvania legislature loaned their assembly room to the Second Continental Congress, a body of delegates representing the 13 British North American colonies. The men who gathered in this room, figures such as John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, were tasked with an unprecedented and seemingly impossible challenge: orchestrating a unified war effort against the world's most formidable empire, while simultaneously attempting to construct a coherent national identity. The rapid succession of decisions made within these four walls dictated the course of the American Revolution. On June 14, 1775, the delegates established the Continental Army, and shortly thereafter, George Washington was appointed as its commander-in-chief. A month later, on July 26th, the Congress appointed Benjamin Franklin as the first Postmaster General, laying the administrative groundwork for the United States Post Office Department. The culmination of this intellectual and political struggle occurred in the sweltering summer of 1776. The Congress debated Richard Henry Lee's forceful resolution, which bluntly stated that the colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. Thomas Jefferson, working tirelessly in a nearby boarding house, drafted a summarizing document that elevated a regional dispute over taxation and localized grievances into a universal, exalted Declaration of Human Rights. On July 2, 1776, the Second Continental Congress officially voted in favor of the Lee Resolution, severing ties with Britain. 2 days later, on July 4th, the final immortal wording of the Declaration of Independence was formally adopted. When the time came to sign the treasonous parchment on August 2, 1776, most of the 56 delegates dipped their quills into a silver inkstand crafted in 1752 by Philadelphia silversmith Philip Singh. That very inkstand remains prominently displayed in Independence Hall today, a tangible, physical link to the exact moment when men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the unprecedented cause of liberty. On July 8, 1776, the Declaration was read aloud for the first time to the public in the adjacent yard, now known as Independence Square, setting off celebrations and forever altering the trajectory of modern political history. However, the sanctuary of the Pennsylvania State House was not absolute. The volatile fortunes of the Revolutionary War forced the Continental Congress into a precarious, nomadic existence. When British forces moved to occupy Philadelphia in late 1776, and again in 1777, the Congress was forced to flee the city, convening in temporary capitals in Baltimore, Maryland, and later in the Pennsylvania municipalities of Lancaster and York. During the devastating British occupation of Philadelphia from 1777 to 1778, the State House itself was seized. The courtroom and the assembly room were utilized by the occupying British military forces, subjecting the building to significant wear and defilement. It was only after the British evacuation that Congress returned to Philadelphia. The Congress officially ratified the Articles of Confederation in this building in 1781, establishing the first formal, albeit fatally fragile, government of the United States. Under these articles, the Congress of the Confederation continued to meet in Independence Hall until the Pennsylvania Mutiny of 1783 forced them to relocate once more to Princeton, New Jersey. The military victory over Great Britain did not secure the survival of the American experiment. By 1787, the Articles of Confederation had proven disastrously weak and ineffective. The federal government lacked the essential powers to levy taxes, regulate interstate commerce, or quell domestic uprisings. The newly independent states were hurtling toward economic collapse, diplomatic irrelevance, and total disunion. Recognizing the existential threat, delegates from across the states gathered once again in the assembly room of the Pennsylvania State House from May to September of 1787 for the Constitutional Convention. The delegates, representing a collection of the nation's most educated, urbane, and experienced legal minds, were initially tasked merely with revising the articles. Instead, they embarked on what amounted to a bloodless political coup, drafting an entirely new framework of national government. George Washington was unanimously elected president of the convention, presiding over the highly contentious debates from a magnificent wooden armchair crafted by John Folwell in 1779. From this seat, Washington maintained order as the delegates fiercely debated the architecture of a new republic, ultimately establishing a bicameral legislature, a single executive branch, and an independent judiciary. The creation of the United States Constitution was not a moment of divine inspiration, but an agonizing, months-long process of bitter compromise. The document was forged by men who harbored deep, lingering reservations about the final product. On September 17, 1787, as the engrossed Constitution lay ready for signatures, an 82-year-old Benjamin Franklin, too frail to deliver his own remarks, handed a meticulously crafted speech to fellow Pennsylvania delegate James Wilson to read to the Assembly. Franklin's words brilliantly captured the inherent imperfection of human governance and aimed to convince the three delegates who announced their refusal to sign, Elbridge Gerry, Edmund Randolph, and George Mason, to abandon their opposition. He confessed, "I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure I shall never approve them." Acknowledging his own fallibility, Franklin urged his fellow delegates to suppress their individual objections for the sake of national survival, stating, "I consent, sir, to this Constitution because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best." As the final delegates affixed their signatures to the parchment, utilizing the very same Sing inkstand from the Declaration of Independence a decade prior, Franklin turned to the members near him. He pointed toward the high-backed mahogany chair Washington had occupied all summer. Franklin noted that artists often struggled to distinguish a rising sun from a setting sun in their compositions. "I have," Franklin famously observed, often and often in the course of the session, and the vicissitudes of my hopes and fears as to its issue, looked at that behind the president without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting. But now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun." During the Constitutional Convention of 1787, the issue of slavery continually threatened to shatter the fragile Union. In August, delegates engaged in explosive debates over the morality and economics of human bondage. Gouverneur Morris of Pennsylvania attacked slavery as a moral abomination, while Southern delegates, including Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, defended it as an economic necessity. To secure the ratification of the Southern states, the Northern delegates made agonizing, foundational concessions. The Three-Fifths Compromise granted slaveholding states disproportionate political power in Congress and the Electoral College by counting 3/5 of their enslaved populations for representation, creating a dominant slave power bloc in the legislature. Furthermore, the Importation Clause prohibited Congress from banning the international slave trade for 20 years, until 1808, though it permitted a tax of up to $10 per person, a tax that was notably never collected to avoid legally recognizing humans as imported property. Finally, the Fugitive Slave Clause mandated that individuals who escaped to free states must be forcefully returned to their enslavers. The framers purposefully and meticulously avoided using the word slave in the document, utilizing terms like such persons. Decades later, in 1840, President John Quincy Adams would describe this linguistic evasion as the fig leaves under which the parts of the body politic are decently concealed. The constitutional seeds of compromise planted in 1787 bore horrific, violent fruit in the decades that followed. In 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, a draconian piece of federal legislation that weaponized the government against freedom seekers. The law allowed heavily armed slave catchers to pursue escaped individuals across state lines into free states like Pennsylvania. It barred accused fugitives from testifying on their own behalf and mandated severe fines of up to $1,000 or 6 months in jail for any citizen who housed, fed, or assisted a freedom seeker. By a grim, almost unbelievable twist of historical fate, the city of Philadelphia was actively leasing the second floor of Independence Hall to the federal government at this exact time. Consequently, in the very building where the Declaration of Independence declared that all men are created equal, Men, women, and children accused of liberating themselves from bondage had their freedom put on trial. Between 1850 and 1854, accused fugitives were detained in the U.S. Marshal's office on the second floor, often languishing for days before facing federal commissioners in the adjacent courtroom. The outcomes were a devastating lottery that mocked the concept of due process. While individuals like Henry Garnet and Tamor Williams were released due to conflicting testimonies, others faced catastrophic injustice. Adam Gibson, a legally free man, was violently arrested at gunpoint and condemned to enslavement due to mistaken identity, saved only when the Maryland enslaver admitted the error. Most tragically, Hannah Dellum, in the advanced stages of pregnancy, was condemned by Commissioner Edward Ingraham, legally enslaving her, her young son, and her unborn child. The atrocities committed on the second floor sparked fierce, organized resistance from Philadelphia's abolitionist and free black communities. In one daring act of civil disobedience, Reverend William Jackson of the Oak Street Baptist Church led community members into Independence Hall, successfully liberating a detained parishioner named William Taylor. Jackson dressed Taylor in women's clothing and smuggled him to Canada. Jackson was subsequently arrested and charged with kidnapping for his heroism. Furthermore, the building served as the site of the highly publicized 1851 treason trial of Cassner Hanway. Hanway, a white miller, had refused to assist a Maryland slaveholder during the bloody Christiana riot, an armed resistance by free and fugitive African Americans just 20 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line. Defended by fiery abolitionist Thaddeus Stevens, Hanway's acquittal inside Independence Hall after just 15 minutes of jury deliberation signaled a massive turning point. The verdict infuriated the South, fueled the Northern abolitionist movement, and deepened the sectional divides that would inevitably lead to the Civil War. Despite its monumental historical significance, the physical survival of Independence Hall was far from guaranteed. In 1799, the state capital moved to Lancaster, and later to Harrisburg in 1812, leaving the old state house practically abandoned and stripped of its primary function. By the early 19th century, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania seriously considered demolishing the historic building and selling the incredibly valuable land to private developers to fund the construction of the new state capital in Harrisburg. The cradle of American democracy narrowly avoided being reduced to commercial rubble. The city of Philadelphia intervened, purchasing the property and the surrounding square in 1816. Yet, architectural preservation was a nascent, poorly understood concept. In a move later condemned by historians as a sacrilegious outrage, city commissioners gutted the assembly room, tearing out its original 18th century paneling and intricate woodwork, dismantling it, and selling it for scrap.